Hello, 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 everybody. Howdy do. Welcome to Nerd Nite. Clap it up. It is so wonderful to see all of the people who braved the cold this evening, especially as we did not have Nerd Nite in December, so it's so glad to be back. Keep clapping. So here we are together at Nerd Nite. Tonight we will have three talks as we always do. The Mayfield Mystique, Sneezing Season, and Swaying the Sun King. Some more details to come about that. We want to give a big thank you. First of all, to Live, who lets us do this here. Let's give them some claps. And of course, we want to thank you nerds for attending. Oh, and then and then our speakers too. They're cool too. Yeah. It's just gonna be me up here breathing into this mic, telling you to clap. So buckle up. Tonight we have Mike Castle, the Mayfield Mystique. I want some more details on that, but I guess we'll just have to wait and see. Sarah Basuni, achoo. That seems very topical for right now. And last but not least, Natalie Ketchings, who'll be telling us about Louis the 14th. I know Roman numerals. But before we get into all of that, it's our Nerd Nite Minute. When I go like this, that's when you have to clap. I'm like Tinkerbell, but fat. So I want to tell you about something that I'm kind of nerdy about. I fell down this nerdy wormhole. Blue is for boys and pink is for girls. Why that came to be and why it's a whole bunch of baloney. So if you have some moments, listen to me talk about this. So if you can believe it, before the 20th century, there was no color, gender identification and color just wasn't a thing. Usually, and by usually I mean all babies basically wore a white dress. And that's for a few reasons. The white is so you could say, look how clean my baby is. Got nothing up on their dress. But also, a dress makes it very easy to change a baby. Also, sizing isn't an issue. You're basically just wearing a big muumuu. So you don't have to go buy new white dresses for your baby. Also, babies were all rocking the same hairdo. Love this cut on this person. Can you guys guess who this person is? Oh, close. Close. What was your guess? I love that guess. It is not FDR, but his brother? Theodore Roosevelt. I think they're brothers. Cousins? Oh. Teddy Roosevelt's hunting moose and was rocking that sweet little gown too. So I love that. So in the 1920s, this quote comes from a popular textile trade magazine. Believe it or not, in the 20s, the norm was, I'll just read it. The generally accepted rule is pink for the boys and blue for the girls. The reason is that pink, being a more decided and stronger color, is more suitable for the boy, while blue, which is more delicate and dainty, is prettier for the girl. So as you can see here, we're already getting into misogyny, patriarchy type stuff. Strong boys wear red, and because pink is a lighter version of red. The thinking is none of this is going to make sense. And then because blue is dainty, that's what girls wear because they're dainty. You should see my sister Molly. She's not dainty. Let's move to the 30s and 40s. This is a picture of Marshall Fields. I don't think it's a picture. It could be a painting. But I loved it so much researching this and looking at photos and images of old department stores. This is no Burlington Coat Factory. This is beautiful. So basically, these department stores came together and did a press blitz to Time Magazine, newspapers, taste-making, fashion magazines, and they said, we're switching it up, y'all. Now it's blue for the boys, and it's pink for the girls. And this is because they wanted you to go buy more clothes. They said, oh, you had your little clothes for your baby, now you gotta go buy a whole new set. And we bought it hook, line, and sinker. This is a partial explanation of why this is. There's so many different cultural influences, so I just kind of picked the ones I loved the most to talk about here. Mamie Eisenhower, it's 1950 something. She's like, pink is my color. I'm wearing pink everything, pink gowns, pink gloves. The White House is pink. Pink was her thing. And the newspapers lost their mind. All of the headlines were like, did you see Mamie Eisenhower in pink? Mamie Eisenhower is very famous for saying, oh, what was the quote? My husband runs the country, but I turn the pork chops. So she very much is interested in creating this housewife image. So basically the idea was, if you're a good housewife, if you're like the first lady herself, you're gonna wear pink. So another cultural influence is why pink is for women or feminine. I love this picture of Dwight D. Eisenhower. I had to include it. Doesn't it look like he's about to start singing Judy Garland? You know, ring, ring, ring goes the trolley. I love it. Well, that's actually Mamie Eisenhower out of drag. No, bad. I just, that picture, oof, I love it. So this is from the 1957 musical Funny Face. This woman here is a fashion editor lady, like, yes, darling, kind of thing. And she sings this song called Think Pink. And in this song, she's talking about, forget blue, forget black, forget gray, wear pink. And what she's really communicating is, remember back in the 30s and 40s when the ladies were up in the factories working, they had to wear the jumpsuits that were blue and pink and gray. Leave those days behind. Now we are flirty, feminine, wearing pink, and pink is the way to go. So that brings us to the late 60s and 70s, and that's where I'm gonna stop talking, because it's been going on for a while. So, all in all, people made all of this up to bolster the patriarchy and sell clothing. The gender binary isn't even a real thing. It's literally just colors. Thank you. Okay, so without further ado, let's welcome our first speaker here. He is Dr. Mike Castle. Come on, Dr. Mike Castle. Dr. Mike Castle is an administrator and adjunct lecturer in history and American culture at U of M Flint, and an admitted 20th century pop culture junkie who can't wait to retire and watch TV all day. Let's give a round of applause for Mike.
That ties in really good.
Oh, this is for you too.
All right, thank you. Oh, gosh. This actually ties in really good. I couldn't have wanted a better first presenter, really, yes. Oh, okay, right, okay. So I do have to say, this has nothing to do with imposter syndrome, but if anyone's ever heard of that or know what that means, I'm going to make everybody feel comfortable immediately. In 2004, Michigan State University gave me a PhD for writing a dissertation about Leave It to Beaver. So there is nothing less that anyone else can do than do that. I mean, it's like, I was thinking, what is the least I could do to earn this? And I found it. So also never mind, I don't even want to go on with that. I will just say really quickly, I've been doing pop culture really ever since I was in 5th grade when my teacher, Mrs. Parciarelli, who was supposedly a really big stickler, assigned our first basically writing assignment paper. And I asked her, and I worried about this the whole night before. Might have been a weekend before, actually. Because I didn't know what to write about. All I thought about was pop culture stuff and things like that. And I said, can I write my paper on Houdini? And she said yes. And from that point on, I never wrote a real paper in my life. So all the way up to the PhD. Okay, so anyway, let me... Okay. Mayfield Mystique. For those of you who don't know, Leave It to Beaver took place in the mythical town of Mayfield, so that's why I'm calling that Mystique, because we truly, and this is what the dissertation was about, we truly believe we know exactly what it is. It's this, this horrible thing that should have never existed, along with all the other programs of its ilk. And in many ways, it has done a number on society that up through this day, it's talking about gender and stereotypes and all of that. But I wanted to kind of poke at this a little bit deeper, and so hence No, I can use the clicker. I think I'll do that. Okay. Some of you may be familiar with the famous June Cleaver joke line. She did actually say it in a few episodes. Ward, I'm worried about the beaver. That's generally been, jokes aside from that, so have academics have been worried about the beaver for many years. David Mark in Comic Vistas referred to Leave It to Beaver and shows of its ilk as benevolent Aryan melodramas. That is not a really good thing. I mean, it's maybe true, but it's not a wonderful, I mean, Joe Connolly and Bob Mosier, who created it, were probably not happy to see that. And then Stephanie Kuntz, in her book of the same title, The Past That Never Was, the title of the book is actually The Way We Never Were. Let me see if I've got this right. I'm going to have to. I don't know. This is a 20-year-old dissertation. I haven't talked about it for a while. So it's based on an article that I had published in a book about education and pop culture, published by Peter Lang in 2001. So this is going back a ways. Called Mayfield After Midnight: Images of Youth and Parenting and Leave It to Beaver. And also the dissertation, the famous dissertation, Mass Culture, History and Memory, and the Image of the American Family, volumes 1 and 2. And I often wondered, who is the jerk who has a dissertation so important that it's got 2 volumes? And I found out, when you go to the place and the people on Zeeb Road who make this, if your spine is a bit, it goes by the dimension of it. So if it's more than 3 or 4 inches or whatever, you got to put it into 2 volumes. It's all, so it means nothing. But it sounds pretty cool, doesn't it? Until you realize that it's also known as a cultural history of Leave It to Beaver, and then it's like, oh my God, okay, we got to take this guy's PhD away. So, just as a reminder, very quickly, the characters. By the way, I don't know if I am going to get through all of this, but you know what? You can live your life perfectly happy and wonderful, never knowing the full story of Leave It to Beaver. So you'll be fine. The featured family: Ward Cleaver, of course, the father; June Cleaver, the mom in pearls, and supposedly exactly, like what we were talking about in that image there, flipping the pork chops, having milk and cookies for the kids. There's a book called Not June Cleaver, and everybody knows what the title, just by the title, they know what that means. What is not June Cleaver? If I say someone is not June Cleaver, what does that mean? There you go. Wally Cleaver, the older brother, played by Tony Dow, who I had, by the way, this is very interesting. I got the opportunity to talk to Barbara Billingsley and to Tony Dow. When my daughter was just a little baby, and I was researching this, Barbara Billingsley, who played June Cleaver, called the house. I wasn't home, I was at work, but my Dahlia's mom, my ex-wife, she talked to her and told her, well, yeah, I've got twins and that. And she actually got parenting advice from June Cleaver. So there was someone in the room who has actually been parented by someone who got advice from June Cleaver, which is great. She turned out way better. Barbara Billingsley, by the way, was extremely nice, and she herself was not June Cleaver. Wally Cleaver, the brother; Beaver Cleaver, the befuddled young brother and namesake of the series. You also need to know Joe Connolly and Bob Mosier. They were the writers and creators of Leave It to Beaver. They've got a kind of, at the time, very interesting pedigree. They had also written for Amos and Andy, if that gives you an idea of what mindset they were coming from. Primarily the TV show, but also in radio. So that's kind of how they met and got together. I'm just going to leave it here. TV ideology. So this kind of ties in a little bit with the first presentation, the minute here. And this was from Todd Gitlin, Inside Prime Time. Todd Gitlin is a famous journalist from the 70s and had gone through Vietnam and wrote, I think, I think his book on, I don't want to say the title because I don't remember it, but what comes across the small screen amounts to an entertaining version of the world, to ideology in a word. But whatever conspiracy theorists may think, this is not because the networks are trying to indoctrinate the helpless masses. No, the networks generate ideology most indirectly and unintentionally by trying to read the popular sentiment and tailoring their schedules toward what they think the cardboard people they've conjured up want to see and hear. So to Gitlin, who did do television history, it's much more insidious, really. It's a commercial incentive in order to do this. And so why do you have this commercial incentive? Well, there's a long-term history for why you have a show like Leave It to Beaver. It didn't just come out of the 50s, although it did come out of the 50s. Years of commitment to a suburban American dream at the expense of urban life. And by the way, you can go back into Europe. There was a time when the suburbs were considered to be a horrible place to live. The central city was where you wanted to be, and if you couldn't afford to be in that, then you were out in the suburbs. That all flipped, and it flipped a lot in the American experience in the 19th century, especially after the arrival of railroads and what they called railroad communities. Years of commitment to the perfectibility of the family. Psychologists were working on this idea of, from Watson to Skinner, and of course, as we'll see a slide of Dr. Benjamin Spock, talking about that perfectibility, that you can have this wonderful, bonded, loving family that raises these loving, wonderful kids. The fact that the Cleavers do it is, they've got writers, but they've got writers who aren't just doing it off the top of their heads. They're doing it because society, since, again, the late 19th century has been telling them that. And, of course, the idiosyncratic worldview of series creators Joe Connolly and Bob Mosher. And I'm going to talk about that in just one moment. First, I just want to talk about suburbia and what's defined as the effective family, the family that has these loving, caring bonds, this kind of family that we were hoping to get to this perfect place. Going back to 1841, Catherine Beecher, in her treatise on domestic economy, argues suburbia is the key to a moral Christian home. Historian Kenneth Jackson, who's a 20th century historian, late 20th century, observed that people found urban areas more a symbol of problems and of evil than of hope, love, and generosity. He wasn't promoting that, but he was saying that that's what you see when you see the literature. And cultural critic Scott Donaldson felt that people often criticized suburbia because it failed to live up to the utopian promises that it tried to espouse, or that it espoused here. Now, can I go back? I don't want you to see that yet. Connolly and Mosher. So I should have just called this Adventures in doing a dissertation about Leave It to Beaver, because that's the much more interesting stuff. They both met, before they did Amos and Andy and became writers, they both met at J. Walter Thompson. And they both arrived there within a year of each other, became friends there. But in order to get into J. Walter Thompson at the time, they obviously didn't have the HR rules that we have now. You had to write this autobiographical sketch, and they asked all kinds of, what religion are you, all this sort of stuff. But anyway, in the autobiographical sketch, then when I found this archive and I found this sketch written by one of the creators of it, Bob Mosher in this case, and before I show it to you, this is the guy who created Leave It to Beaver. When he, I think it was 37, went to J. Walter Thompson, filled out all his stuff, handed it in, this is what he wrote. My life began in Auburn, New York on January 18th, 1915, and resulted at the same time in the death of my mother, whose memory I idealize. This is the guy who created June Cleaver. So when I talk about idiosyncratic worldview, this is a person who was not raised by anything well, he actually had some very nice aunts who raised him, but as did, by the way, Joe Connolly. Neither of these two grew up in that idyllic family in the 20s. That didn't exist for them. I found this to be very interesting, though, for the person who created that So that was in 37, 20 years before he creates June Cleaver with his friend Joe Connolly. This is what he's thinking. This is the first thing when he's going to tell you about his life. The very first thing is that his birth resulted in his mother's death, whose memory I now idealize. Now, another thing, though, as anyone knows, if you're a historian or any sort of researcher, you can't take these things like, oh, okay, this was a shock. I mean, when I saw this was like, this is like gold, this is going to block so well. I mean, I hate that, I don't mean to diminish what happened here, but it's the thing that a researcher really looks for, It's like, wow, this is amazing, this explains everything. It doesn't really explain everything, okay? Because even if he hadn't lost his mom, even if he'd grown up in an idyllic family, all that other stuff, the promotion of suburbia, just the way that mass media did these things would have happened anyway. But this perhaps led, one can say, to the type of parent he decided to write about. Yes, this is true. Fun fact, October 4th, 1957, Russia launched the Sputnik and Leave It to Beaver debuted the exact same day. Now, the thing is, too, is like, okay, which one does Mike want to write about? Well, I'll pick this one. Okay, all right. So, and that's what I did. But, how often do you think of Sputnik anymore, right? Okay. Yeah, America in 1957. So now, there's a historical precedent. The baby boom began in 46 and 63. People were having babies, left and right. Families weren't just 2 kids. They were 3 kids, 4 kids. It reversed what we called the baby dearth in the Depression. You start to see this post-war, not only are people having kids again, but they're having bigger families and stuff like that. So that's when Leave It to Beaver is there. So what I'm saying is when you start complicating the story, it makes sense to a certain extent that you're going to have TV shows about families abounding at this time. 86% of children born lived in 2-parent homes at this time. This is according to Stephanie Kuntz, who wrote The Way We Never Were. 60% of those were born into the male, what they called at the time, breadwinner families. Now, keep in mind, television chose to totally ignore, until the 1970s, the 40%, which then was even more. But even in the 50s, you had 40% of these that were 1-parent families. Or two income earners. In 1950, 71.7% of mothers with children aged 6 to 17 did not work outside of the home. Again, though, even in 1950, even when Leave It to Beaver was on, TV chooses to ignore the 30%. Like nothing. This to Leave It to Beaver, this was 100%, right? And while suburbia is the thing that everybody is showing, in all of the shows, it was basically 20 to 25% of Americans who lived in suburbia. Oh, thank you. All right, there we go. Okay. How am I doing on time? Probably horribly, right?
5 minutes.
5 minutes. Okay. All right.
Or if you'd like to do 5 minutes of Q&A.
I think the less people ask me about this, the better I am, because I'm 20 years away from it. But Robert Fishman in Bourgeoisie Utopias argues that suburbs are significant for what they included as excluded. The FHA, as we know, or if you've studied this at all, redlined African Americans out of suburbia. So while suburbia was democratized economically, certainly it wasn't racially in the immediate post-war era, and that again took laws to change. In television, though, you had all these suburban settings. Ozzie and Harriet in 1952, Father Knows Best, 1954. The Goldbergs, which debuted first on radio but then on television in 49, moves to the suburbs known as Haverville in 1954, but they were off the air by 1955, so that didn't work. And some people may note in here that Ozzie and Harriet, Father Knows Best, Leave It to Beaver, these tended to be white Protestant families. The Goldbergs were not white Protestant families, and they tried to do that move and that didn't tend to work for them. And then I'm going to skip this because this is just a little theory here. Ward and June were only perfect because society had been telling all of us for years that they could be. So in other words, that didn't just come out in the idea of raising baby by the book. As I said before, Watson and behaviorism was supposed to be the guide for parents. B.F. Skinner and his Skinner box and raising people. Robert and Helen Lind, who wrote an incredible book called Middletown. Social change can happen with children who are more susceptible to change. So, and then of course, really raising baby by the book. Baby and Child Care by Benjamin Spock. I think later changed to Infant and Child Care. And my advisor, actually, Julie Griffithson, MSU back at the time, she wrote the book, Raising Baby by the Book. It was an amazing book if you're ever interested in that to look at. There was also, though, in episodes of Leave It to Beaver, an opposition to science. So at the same time, Ward and June were trying to be perfect parents because science told them they could, historically, but television does this weird thing with science, and we see it, to this day, right? It's like, I'm not going to have any psychologist tell me how to raise my child. You literally see that in sitcom after sitcom. I think I'm going to try to move here just a little bit. So as I go through this and talk about the things that that Leave It to Beaver was, in a strange way, Leave It to Beaver can serve in some ways as a documentary. For instance, certainly serves as a documentary of segregationist housing policies. Okay, I mean this was a suburban white milieu. Gender stereotypes totally reinforced within this. Suburban life, heteronormative life. There were so many episodes in Leave It to Beaver about what a boy is supposed to be. It's like the pink and the blue, right? Okay, and this is one of the things that's being argued and reinforced. One of my favorite episodes, Beaver's baby carriage. Beaver wants the wheels on a baby carriage from a friend of his at school, wants the wheels to a baby carriage, and doesn't have the intelligence that his older brother knows to take the wheels off and bring them home. So Beaver is pushing through this suburban setting a baby carriage as a young 10, 12-year-old boy. And of course, that leads to comedy. And everyone knows that at the time that's the expected comedy. And these were the stereotypes that were being perpetuated within the series. So again, it's being rather true in many ways, not positively, but true to where we were at this time. Questions? Why? Yes?
Probably have time for one or two questions, and then we're going to go for a break. If that.
I could use one.
Yeah. Question. We got a question. Yep, shout it out real loud for us.
How did Eddie Haskell finish all this?
I had a picture on Eddie Haskell. Eddie Haskell, it turns everything upside down in this. But these shows depend on the Star family being perfect. You see it in the Waltons, you see it in other things. And then everybody else in Mayfield is dysfunctional. I mean, there is not another good parent, and Eddie Haskell is at the top of that list as not another good kid in the series. Thank you for asking that.
How about one more?
Yes?
Did we swing the other way with things like Malcolm in the Middle and Home Improvement, where it was in Malcolm in the Middle, it was a total dysfunction?
Right. I mean...
Can you repeat the question so folks?
Oh, yeah. With shows like Malcolm in the Middle, and what was the other one? And Home Improvement, did we swing the other way? I think we did, but also I truly believe that television likes to think that we did, because I think that many of the stereotypes, despite supposedly trying to fight those, still exist, because in many ways it's still an effective family. It's a horror with All in the Family, right? All in the Family was the show that threw Leave It to Beaver on its end. But at the same time, All in the Family, its very title means every problem can be solved all in the family, even though you got this horrible bigoted father there. You know, I mean, I think what TV loves to do is self-congratulate itself. Like there's episodes of like Roseanne, and Roseanne was an amazing show. And yes, you are correct in shows like that they did do this. But at the same time, it makes them feel good almost about that they've gone so far. And I think when we watch television today, I watch a lot of older television actually. I don't know if television has really progressed. I mean, because it's become in a smaller sort of subdivided sort of thing on cable, you do have more diversity of what you can do. But back in these days with the networks, they wanted to go to what they called least objectionable programming. What are most people going to accept? And, you know, so, but that's a great question. That's a great question.
Let's give Mike a round
Thank
of
you.
applause.
This was fun. Thank you.
All right, let's see what time it is on the old cell phone. But I liked yours a lot too. We can both be good. It is now 7:32. I'd like you to take an 8-minute break. Please go get a drink, tip your bartenders, and come on back for our next presenter. And maybe while you are grabbing a drink, if you have a question for Mike, I'm sure he'd be glad to answer it. Alrighty, get to it.
Oh, hello, nerds. Welcome back. Your host has changed because emceeing Nerd Night is so much fun. Two of us share it. So thank you for Jacob for sharing with me. I'm Emily. I'm also from the library, and I'm so excited to be here tonight to learn with all of you and laugh and all of those great things. Speaking of great things, I got a preview of our next talk, and guess what? It's great. So I would like to introduce you to Sarah Basuni. Sarah is a PhD student studying infectious disease and social epidemiology at U of M. Outside of school, she enjoys trivia, gardening, attending crossword tournaments with her partner. We need to talk about this after, Sarah. And spending time with their 3 cats. So join me in welcoming Sarah.
Is this mic perfect? Okay, awesome. All right. Hi, everybody. Okay, cool. I'm just situating up here because I'm like, the light's right there. So hi, my name is Sarah Basuni, pronouns she, any, as Emily so kindly introduced me. All right, so my talk today is on epidemiology and RSV. And first, let me just introduce myself a little bit more. She did such a beautiful introduction, so you've heard a little bit of it, actually. I'm a third-year PhD candidate in epidemiology here at the University of Michigan. I had done my master's like 10 years ago and then was like, hey, I'm ready for more punishment. Let's come back. And I'm currently studying RSV transmission, and I find it really interesting. The data I'm using is from 2 household cohort studies here in the state of Michigan, so I'm really lucky to be able to use that data for some of the questions I'm asking. And just more generally, I've long been interested in understanding infectious diseases, like what they are, why they are, how do they spread, and also understanding the social and physical environment and how those can affect the risk or the likelihood of someone getting an infectious disease and having a bad one sometimes. So now that you know a little bit about me, what are we going to talk about tonight? I tried to break up this talk because I was like, it's kind of heavy. Like, we've had some really wonderful topics that are really funny and exciting. And I was like, I'm going to be like the sad, serious person, but it's fine. Hopefully we'll have a couple chuckles, and hopefully you'll still enjoy this part of it. So I broke it up into 3 parts. First, I'm going to talk about what's epidemiology. Some of you in the room might be card-carrying epidemiologists, and some of you might not have heard of this word before tonight. So just want to make sure we're all on the same page. Then I'm going to talk about what RSV is. And then the last part is, you're like, cool, Sarah, that's really esoteric knowledge. I don't know if I really care. But I'm hoping that you'll be able to take away some actionables after this talk. Oh, wait, and last thing is, it's kind of hard to see, but in the lower right, I tried to designate like ABC, which section we're in. So that way, if at some point in the talk you're like, wait, where are we? You can briefly orient. All right, so let's talk about epidemiology. So epidemiology is a subfield under the larger umbrella of public health. And our goal as public health people is we want to reduce disease and burden and improve health on a population level. And public health has a lot of subdisciplines. These are just a few. And of course, my favorite is epidemiology, but I would be, I could not do this work without the work of all of these other subdisciplines. So shout out to all of my colleagues. Now, if we think about epidemiology, I'm also a bit of a word nerd. I love understanding where a word comes from, what are the roots. And so to better understand it, let's look at the roots. It kind of looks at first like epidermis, but we don't study skin. Instead, if we look at epidemio and logia, which are the Greek roots, that translates into upon, people, and study of, which I think is really cool. I think it's very poetic. It sounds very Shakespearean, because it's like, this is the... There. We'll go back 1 second. There we go. It can translate into the study of that which is upon the people, which just sounds really cool and mythical and awesome. But that's not necessarily you can't really take that to the NIH and be like, hey, I want to do this. So we're going to pull this definition a little bit more into the 21st century. And a form of the definition you'll more frequently see now is that epidemiologists, what we do is we study the states of health and disease so that we can recommend changes to improve the health in our populations. And there are 2 key parts of this definition I wanted to emphasize. So one is that we recommend changes. This is not just learning for the sake of learning, which is also really cool, but part of our purview and part of our purpose as epidemiologists is we have this applied aspect. We really want to make a difference and improve health. And the other aspect is that it's a population level science. So in contrast to our colleagues in clinical medicine who do some phenomenal work, by definition, their work is restricted to the individual level. Like you can really only see one patient at a time. But as epidemiologists, as public health professionals, we can make changes and recommend changes on a population level. So we can work in conjunction with our clinical medicine and other colleagues, which is really awesome. Okay. So yeah, pre-2020, some of you might not have ever talked to an epidemiologist. Maybe you did. Maybe you're cool like that. But after 2020, I think all of us had at least some idea of public health and what that feels like. Sometimes very, very close. Like I got my nose swabbed at places like this. And I think it's just a helpful reminder that as epidemiologists, we're working all the time in the background. A lot of that work is invisible, but we are doing a lot of work and trying to do our best given our resources. All right, so let's move on to what RSV is. As I mentioned, I'm a word nerd. So what does RSV even stand for? Again, some of you might be acutely familiar with it, and others of you are like, yeah, girl, what is this? So R is for respiratory, S is for syncytial, and V is for virus. And my goal is that by the end of this part of the talk, that you'll be able to fill in this sentence, which is a blank spread by blank, that blank in the blank. And then I have some illustrations and pictures, and so throughout I'll designate the RSV particle by this virus emoji. It's not to scale or anything, obviously, but hopefully you could just keep that in mind. I would be terrified if the virus was that big. I'd be like, no. All right, so let's talk about the respiratory part of RSV. So one of the key aspects of it is that it's spread by droplets. So not by aerosols, not by tiny, tiny airborne particles, and not by contact, which is something where you have to go touch, you have to eat. It's instead spread by these droplets. So this is when you're coughing, when you're sneezing. Kids are so cute, we love them. They're little germ factories, and sometimes they just walk up and sneeze in your face, and it's really cute. My cat does that sometimes, and I'm like, no. And so you get these little droplets of saliva and other fluids, and that's how the virion or the viral particle is transmitted to another person. And so as we continue to talk about the respiratory system, I think it's helpful to think about it like a tree, but one that's upside down. Because as you go from, we'll talk about shortly, the nose and the mouth down into the deeper parts of the respiratory system, it's like going from a trunk to smaller branches to kind of the leaves. So kind of keep that image in mind if that's helpful. So I'll go back. So let's say we are an air particle or a viral particle. What is the route that we take as I breathe in? Hopefully I'm not breathing in any viral particles right now, but let's say I breathe in. What is the path that takes? So we're going to start in the nose and the mouth. Then we're going to go down through the larynx, which is your voice box, enter your trachea, which is also known as your windpipe. So that's kind of like the trunk of that tree. It's the biggest part. And then it branches off into these primary and secondary bronchi, which are big branches into each of the lungs. And then we'll go a little bit farther into the bronchioles, all the way to the edges of your respiratory system in the alveoli. And that's the location where gas exchange happens. So if I'm breathing in air, at what point does the oxygen in the air get into my bloodstream? It's at this level, at the alveoli, so way at the edges. And so RSV infection can affect anywhere along this pathway, but it most severely affects the nose and mouth and the bronchioles, so the cells and the tissue in those locations. And since I'm a visual person, I was like, this is a very helpful illustration. But I also wanted to bring in some imaging. I apologize to anyone who can't quite see it if you're on the edges or anything. But I'll try to describe it. So we have two x-rays. The one on the left is of normal lungs, and the one on the right is of lungs that are infected, a person who's infected with RSV. And there are two black arrows. I'll try to highlight them here and here. And so they're trying to designate, there's a little bit of fuzziness or haziness on the image. And that means that there's some kind of inflammation at the bronchial level of this person who is infected, which is that sucks. I hate it. You don't want that. But it's kind of hard to tell, especially if you're not a specialist. I'm not a pulmonologist. I know because this is what PubMed told me is what it is. But I was like, how can I make this maybe a little bit clearer? So I pulled up a couple tissue specimens. So these are slices of lung tissue. Again, apologies if folks can't see. But the one on the left is a normal lung tissue. I'll describe it in a second. And the one on the right is an infected lung tissue. And so if we look at the one on the left, you can see there's this BR, this white circle. So the BR stands for bronchial. And the red splotch, is an arteriole that travels alongside the bronchiole. Not really relevant for our purposes, but just so you know what it is. And the bronchiole is lined with these like purple cells, which I'll talk about shortly. But as you can see, it's white, which on this specimen presentation means that it's just air, like it's airspace. It's like a straw or a tube. You want it to be open, unclogged, unoccluded, because that's how the gas is going to get down all the way to the alveoli. But then if you look on the right, I'm like, yeah, where is it? Where did the gap go, the airspace? As you can see, it's completely blocked with like cellular debris, detritus, all of this from an immune response that your body has prompted. It's like, yeah, good job, but also like, good job breaking it, hero, because you can't really get gas through here, right? This straw is clogged. And so that obviously makes it really hard to breathe, and it makes it really hard to get gas all the way down to your bloodstream. And if you imagine this in the tissue of like a newborn, that's like not a great way to meet the world. Like you're really excited, you're like, woo, and then bam, RSV comes and like blocks your ability to be able to breathe well. And so that's kind of some of the takeaway of like how RSV can affect the respiratory system. Speaking of breathing, I should breathe a little deeper because I'm like so excited, but I'm like, yeah, you need to breathe. All right. So speaking of the lung tissue, let's talk about the syncytial part of RSV. So as I mentioned, this is the same slide that I was talking about for normal lung tissue. And I mentioned that these purple cells that line that tube we would talk about. So these are epithelial cells. And I'll just have a really basic illustration here. So epithelial cells are found throughout various organ systems in your body. And they're most characteristically found in organ systems or in locations that are like the barrier to the outside world. So this is your mucous membranes in your mouth and your eyes, your gastrointestinal system, and your respiratory system. And so these epithelial cells, they're like little soldiers, right? They don't want anyone to come through. They don't want a foreign pathogen to enter your body. And so they're usually lined up really tightly next to each other like sardines. And they normally should just have one nucleus per cell. So one computer, one brain for the cell. Not the mitochondria, not the powerhouse, but I'm not talking about that one. Just one nucleus. In other organ systems in your body, sometimes you have a multinucleated cell, which means one cell but has a bunch of nuclei. They're called syncytia. In those organ systems, it's normal. But in the respiratory system, they should not be forming. That is abnormal. But then RSV arrives and is like, hey, let's do a syncytia. And no, you don't want it, but RSV will make it happen. And so as a scientist, as scientists in the field, there are questions about like, why would it do this, right? There's usually an evolutionary advantage for an organism or a virus to have done something so many times that it becomes characteristic. So we currently have two hypotheses, and I was like, I'll quickly mention them. The two are, one is that it's easier for virus to spread from cell to cell, and the other is that it's easier for the virus to evade the immune system. And as I was thinking about how to present this in the talk, because I was like, how do I present this without going deep into jargon and talking like cytokines and like immune response and like cytotoxic killers? Like, we don't need to get into all of that tonight. We can do that in a future talk. But for tonight, I was like, how can I talk about this in a way that hopefully makes sense? And then I remembered that I really love public transportation, and I love subways, and I love trains. So let's use that as the metaphor to kind of better understand why RSV might want to form these syncytia. So if we look at the first hypothesis, that it's easier for the virus to spread cell to cell, if we think about these 4 epithelial cells doing their best, I just wanted to number them for clarity. So let's say on the left, we start with 1, go 2, 3, 4 next to each other. And let's say the RSV particle wants to get from cell 1 to cell 4. So similar to a subway car or a train, there are a couple ways you can do it. One way is the virus, or like you if you're on a subway car, you can go into cell 1, then get out, and then go back into cell 2, and then out, and then into cell 3, and then out, and then into cell 4, which is really exhausting. Like, this is just long to do. It's not effective. If this were a subway car, you'd like get out onto the platform, and then you might trip. The doors might close on your backpack as you try to get back into a new one. Like, you're bumping into people. You might not be able to get back into the next car, which for the virus would be the equivalent of like, maybe you can exit cell 2, but you wouldn't be able to fuse to cell 3 and get into it. So you're left naked, and the immune system is going to attack you. So a different way is, like on a subway car, you have sometimes these little passageways, right? So you don't have to go out onto the platform to get into the neighboring car. You can just walk through this little secret passageway. And so functionally for the RSV virus, let's say it creates these syncytial, like these secret connections between cells 1, 2, and 3, aka it creates a syncytia for those 3, then it's a lot easier for it to get to cell 4. It's the equivalent of me just walking through the subway car instead of getting back out and then going back in. And it's a lot more efficient, it's a lot nicer, like much preferred. The other hypothesis is that maybe it's easier for the virus to evade our immune response. This one is a little less data, like we're still figuring it out as a field, but this is one other hypothesis that's complementary to the one I just mentioned. And for this one, I was like, yeah, how should I make this a metaphor? And I was like, okay, let's think about pickpockets. I've been watching too many like spy thrillers, and so it's like, let's talk about pickpockets. So let's say I'm on a subway car, and there are 4 other people in the car when I realize that my wallet is gone. And I'm like, oh, I've been pickpocketed. If there are only 4 other people in the car, it's much easier, much more likely I'll be able to figure out who the person it is, or like be able to ask for help. But in contrast, if I'm on a really crowded subway platform or a really crowded subway car, like my wallet is long gone, I'm not gonna find that, like maybe if I have an AirTag or something, but basically I'm not gonna find that thing. And similarly, there's an idea that RSV, when it infects cells, it prompts a response in which the immune system has a really hard time finding it in these syncytial cells. It's kind of like it's hiding away in this big crowd. And so because of that, that's why we think it might be forming syncytia and other viruses like it and other infectious agents. So last bit of this section for RSV and analyzing the name. So now let's quickly talk about the virus. So I have a couple illustrations of it. It's pleomorphic, so it takes a couple different forms, but it's usually in this ellipsoid or spherical shape, and it's studded on the outside with a bunch of proteins. And just making sure we're all on the same page, a virus is an infectious agent. Many people classify it as an obligate parasite, so that means it needs someone else's machinery to replicate, which is why it has to infect a cell, in this unfortunate case, our epithelial cells in the respiratory tract. And for any virologists in the room, if you really want to know, it's a group 5 Baltimore classification, which means it's a negative sense, single-stranded RNA genome. For any non-virologists in the room, if you're like, cool, what was that? Which is fine, because at one point I was that too. It has some very famous bedfellows in the kingdom that it's in. So these are coronaviruses, influenza viruses, Ebola viruses, and the measles virus. And then lastly, if you want to impress your friends at dinner later, so I mentioned there are a bunch of proteins on the outside, and there's one that's a fusion protein, and that's essential for the virus to bind to our cells. And there's a really cool story behind scientists figuring out that at some point, they realized that that fusion protein actually changes shape before and after the virus fuses with our cells. And until they realized that, it was very challenging to create vaccines against RSV. And now that they've figured it out, they've been able to develop, spoiler alert, because it's one of the next things like later in the talk I'll mention, we've been able to develop vaccines against it for like the first time in 50 plus years, which is really cool. And so yeah, if you want to impress your friends, talk about the pre-fusion protein, you're welcome. All right. So RSV, once again, respiratory syncytial virus. And I think now we can fill in this sentence. Yeah, that's basically covered. So it's a virus spread by droplets that attack cells, there we go, in the respiratory tract. So now you're all experts in RSV. This is great. And then you might be like, haha, Sarah, nice try, because you said you're an epidemiologist, you said you talked about populations, and you've only been talking about cellular and individual level. What's up? And I'm like, don't worry, because now we're going to briefly talk about what RSV looks like in the population. And if we think about the life course, so from cradle to grave, RSV, like a lot of other things, a lot of other diseases, unfortunately affects most severely those who are the youngest and those who are the oldest. In fact, our estimates currently are that over 60,000 children worldwide die of an RSV infection every year. We have new tools in our arsenal in the last couple of years, so obviously we're really hoping this number goes down. But unfortunately, this is the current set of estimates that we have. And then I would be remiss as someone who's like really passionate about health equity and mitigating health inequities, to not mention that Indigenous infants, unfortunately, have the highest burden of RSV infection around the world. The data is limited just because not a lot of people have been studying it, but the data is consistent that they have the highest rates of like RSV infection, highest rates of RSV burden, so like they have the worst infections. And this is obviously very likely to be connected with the long hand of like settler colonialism and genocide, and these groups unfortunately living in really low resourced areas and not accidentally. And so we as a field have a lot of work to do and have been doing, and so we'll keep you posted on that. All right, so we finished section 2, you survived. Now, hopefully, kind of more fun part. What can you do with all of this fun knowledge that I've just dumped in your lap? So there are 3 kind of sub-aims here. 1 is social behaviors, 2 is vaccination, and 3 are supportive treatments. For social behaviors, perhaps unsurprisingly, it's post-2020, but some stuff is not post-2020. Mask up if you can. When you're in large gatherings, kind of like this one, it's a good idea to mask up if you can, not only to protect yourself, but hopefully to break any potential chain of infection or transmission, especially if you have people at home who might be more vulnerable, or people who are immunocompromised, you're also helping them out. If you think you've been exposed, not just to RSV, but to any respiratory virus, because yeah, tis the season, quarantined. So I know it's really hard. So sometimes we have to be in person at work or at school. But if you're able to quarantine and kind of physically separate yourself from folks, please do so. And similarly, if you're feeling sick, please isolate. I had a friend and his partner who wanted to come tonight. They were really excited. And they texted me like 2 hours ago. It was like, he said I could share this, but he was like, yeah, so he got back from a conference and he tested positive for COVID, so I'm gonna stay home. And I was like, perfect, that's exactly what I wanna hear. You both get gold stars, like that's exactly the right thing to do. And thank you for like being able to stream, because you hopefully won't miss out on this cool stuff. But yeah, please, if you can, these social behaviors make a huge difference, as many of us have personally experienced in the last 4 years, and it can continue to be really effective. Then, okay, this was kind of really exciting for me. So pre-2023, this slide would have been like vaccination and like a wish list. But 2023 happened, and what happened was we got not just 1, but we got 2 vaccines that were approved by the FDA against RSV, which is like super exciting, especially in the RSV world. And these vaccines are targeting 2 populations that are especially vulnerable, or like the vaccines can do a lot of good for. One group is, are you pregnant or thinking of becoming pregnant? You should talk to your doctor about a Brisvo. I was like, can I do the ad voice? I don't know. And so this is for pregnant people who are between 32 and 36 weeks of gestation. The idea is you get the injection, and that can help protect your newborn from an acute lower respiratory tract infection that's caused by RSV, which is like fabulous, because that's, as I mentioned, one of the worst times to get RSV. You're welcomed into the world, it's great, it's shiny, it's new, and then RSV punches you in the face. You don't want that. And so that's one thing, definitely talk to your doctor if you are in that age range, or if you know someone who is. And then you might be like, cool, Sarah, I am 60 years or older, what can I do? Well, guess what? You've got a vaccine too. Strongly recommend, if you can get it, or at least talk to your doctor about getting it. I strongly recommend it to my parents, who, bless their hearts, are well over 60. And so they were able to talk to their doctor and get it as well. Also, if you are immunocompromised for whatever reason, you can still talk to them about Arexvy, the second one. Depending on the conditions, you might be eligible. And then the last one, this one's a little more niche, but I think it's still just for the sake of completeness, sharing it with folks. So if someone has an infant who is of age, like younger than 6 months typically, but can be less than a year, during RSV season, there is a supportive treatment. So it's a monoclonal antibody. It's an injection. And can help protect them throughout the course of respiratory virus season against RSV. And this is one that definitely talk to your doctor, because there are a lot of complexities within it. But the key part is this is especially applicable for kids or infants who are premature or have like a constellation of conditions around prematurity. A lot of that has to do with their lung development. So if they're premature, their lung development isn't, it's not ready. And so they're especially at risk for not just getting RSV, but having a really bad infection that can have some really bad results. Okay, you all have been great. Let's wrap up. So, what do we talk about today in however many minutes? Tried to pack it full, but hopefully not too full. So first, we talked about what epidemiology is. So that's, once again, studying the states of health and disease so that we can recommend changes to improve health in our populations. You all are now experts, basically, in RSV, which is respiratory syncytial virus. Once again, it's a virus spread by droplets, so like coughing or sneezing. It attacks the cells in your respiratory tract, and the youngest and the oldest among us are at highest risk for not just getting infected, but having a bad infection or dying of it. And so then you're like, great, Sarah, what do I do with this? And I'm like, don't worry, I got you. You've got to mask up, stay home if you're sick, and get vaccinated if you're eligible, or at least pass that information on to people who are eligible. With that, thank you so much. I just briefly want to say a couple thank yous. One is to the Relate workshop, which I did not know about Nerd Nite until I took this workshop last summer, so shout out to them. And then major shout out to the library and Jacob and Emily for all that they've done. And then different Emily, who's my advisor, who's amazing, plus all the other people here who make my dissertation possible. Thank you so much. Sorry?
I don't know that we got time for Q&A.
That's okay. That is fine.
All right. Yep, so we do have to jump straight to our break, but if you have a burning question, Sarah has already given permission that you can come up and ask them. So come to talk to Sarah, and we're going to take another 8-minute break. So I'm going to see you back here at 8:15-ish. Yeah. All right, see you then. All right, folks. I think it's been about 8 minutes, and I don't see anyone standing waiting for drinks. So welcome back. We have one more wonderful speaker tonight. And I am not just saying that because she also is doing me a huge favor when a few weeks ago I said, hey, Natalie, I need one more speaker. You did so great. And I remember you said you had another idea. How does January 9th look? And guess what? She said it looked okay, and she's here. So not only do you already know that Natalie Catchings is great, but she is also a DNA scientist by day with many other nerdy interests by night. And in fact, she's not talking about science tonight, which is not only does Nerd Nite bring scientists to talk to us about science like Sarah, we also bring scientists to talk to us about history like Natalie. So please join me in welcoming Natalie Catchings.
Hi, everyone. I'm really hoping to follow suit with my fellow presenters and leave no time for Q&A. So that's my cue for today. Thank you. As Emily mentioned, so I gave a talk last year here at Nerd Nite. It was about DNA in the movies, and I was very qualified for that. Today's talk, I am in no way qualified for, besides the fact that I am, one, French, as per the outfit, and two, a big nerd about this time period, and I've always liked it in my entire life, so I've just read and seen a lot about this. So, ladies and gents, I would like you to meet Louis Dieudonné de Bourbon, Roi de France, also known as Louis XIV. Hubba hubba, I know, right? Yeah. Quick show of hands. Who has heard of Louis XIV? Raise your hand. Okay. Keep your hands up, keep your hands up. Keep your hands up. Do you think that we're going to be talking about Louis XIV and the French Revolution and Marie Antoinette and losing their heads? Keep your hand up if you think that. Oh, okay. So we do have people who know that. So the one who lost their head and everything is Louis XVI. So that's not who we're talking about today. It's not Marie Antoinette. Who we are talking about is someone who's the most famous king in France's history. So if you go to France and you ask a kid at school, they will tell you Louis XIV. But I find that outside of France, he's not particularly well known. And I plan to rectify this tonight in 15 minutes. He's the eldest son of Louis XIII and Anne of Austria. And his name, Dieudonné, actually means God-given. And that was truly what it was for his mother. For 23 years, she wasn't able to have kids. And if you're, married to a king and your sole job is to pop out an heir, it doesn't look good for you that you're not able to do it. So for her and for monarchy in France, he was a huge blessing. He himself had many children. He had 6 with his wife. He had 9 with his mistress that were eventually legitimized, and at least 6 that were not legitimized, so there's probably a whole lot more. This man was a ladies' man. He also had the longest reign ever of any monarchy anywhere. He reigned until he was 77 years old, which at the time clearly was an old age. Does anyone know who has the second longest reign in history? Yeah, man, you guys are spoiling all my jokes tonight. Queen Elizabeth II has the second longest reign in history. So that caused a few issues because he actually outlived his son, his grandson, and so the next king was his great-grandson, who was 5 years old at the time he died. It also explains why he legitimized so many of his bastard children, because for a second there, it looked like while these kids could never have actually gone on the throne, there was not many heirs to go around for Louis. And the other thing that he's known for the moniker the Sun King. And this is something that very early on in his reign, he took on the sun as a symbol for his what he was doing, and he really stuck to it. And he was the Sun King. We're going to talk about 3 aspects of it today. In fact, he was centric. In that sense, he was centric in I am in the middle and everything else revolves around me. 2, he was radiant. Everything that I do touches everyone everywhere. And I'm divine. I don't have to explain that one. Centric. Well, he was one of the first kings to get rid of his prime minister. Before that, everyone else, he had a prime minister, he had ministers that advised him. Louis was the first one who said, nope, I am the absolute decider of everything. What I say goes, and I want to know everything that goes on in my kingdom. You, at best, are giving me advice, but I make the decisions. What he also does is that he keeps his unruly nobility groveling and distracted. We're going to talk about that later. But he is, by every definition, an egocentric and a self-centric person. Radiant. He made France the epicenter of culture in Europe at the time and for probably a couple more centuries. A couple more centuries, everyone who was cool spoke French. Everyone who wanted was in the inn, wore French designs, culture, everything. But what it also allowed him to do is that he was able to control the narrative through his favorite artists, which is something that at the time kings didn't really do. Here he could control how they spoke about him, how they spoke about him probably more kindly than they would have otherwise. And divine. He was very much a sovereign by divine right, who serves God's will. He's here by God's will and to serve God. And while he doesn't think that he is himself divine, he is absolutely a representative of God in France. And that is huge. Really, his kind of like determination to do this. And one of the things they will do is reestablish Catholicism as the only religion allowed in France. So the talk today is not just about our dude Louis, but it's mostly about how many people in his life, and namely many women in his life, were actually able to influence him. And we're going to talk about 3, but right now I'm going to talk about, really briefly, the ones that we could have talked about if I had, a full hour or whatever. One is his wife, Maria Teresa, who was Spanish. She's also his cousin twice over. So like his dad and her mom are siblings, and her mom and his dad, whatever it works out, I never get it right. Either way, their parents were siblings and they're cousins. It's super gross. Like it's so inbred. Henrietta, who is his youngest brother's wife, also one of his cousins, he had an affair with her. Louise was one of Henrietta's ladies-in-waiting, and I wish I were making this up, but Louis wanted to hide the fact that he was having an affair with Henrietta, so he pretended to court Louise, fell in love with her, took her on as a mistress, and cast Henrietta to the side. I mean, you just can't make this up. I wish I were. And then Lieselot, who is this, I love her. She's this like no-nonsense, no BS German princess who was his brother's second wife. And she would have actually end up being very influential and give him a lot of advice that he would follow. And the only person on this list that he didn't sleep with, so also impressive. So, one of the 3 women, his mother, the influential mother, Anne-Marie Mauricy d'Autriche, Queen of France. It means she's from Austria. No, not really. She's actually from Spain. She just has the moniker of Austria because at the time, Austria and Spain were the same kingdom. I know, super clear as mud, guys. She is regent from 1643 to 1651. If you've read The Three Musketeers, she's the young queen that they talk about in the book. Or if you've seen any of the versions of The Three Musketeers, she's the young queen. She governs on behalf of Louis from the time that his father passes away when he's 5 years old to when he comes of age at 13. And Mazarin, Cardinal Mazarin, is both Louis' godfather, her very unpopular prime minister, and potentially her larva. And she is 3 things. She's devoted, unprepared, and pliant. Devoted. Everyone will say that she was a great mother to him. She was warm, she was there, she was present, they talked, they had a good relationship. Unprepared. Women in nobility, princesses in nobility at the time were bred to be pretty, to shut up, to have babies, and that's it. So when she became regent, she was highly unprepared for the role that she was taking on, which made her very pliant. She was easily influenced by people around her, including the cardinal, including other people in general, which led to Louis having a bit of a tumultuous childhood, which you would not necessarily think for a king. There was this event called La Fronde from 48 to 53, which was partly a civil unrest in Paris and partly a rebellion from the high nobles. The civil unrest part, I think by nowadays, our standards, we would think it's fairly common demands or like reasonable demands. The rebellion from the high nobles was straight up temper tantrum. They just wanted more money and just to cause mayhem all around. And Louis watched really how his mother, Anne and Mazarin, handled the rebellion, mostly by caving in. So mostly by giving the nobles the money that they wanted, and at the time, how a noble threw a temper tantrum and was like, "King, I'm unhappy with what you're doing. I'm going to walk away to my castle somewhere else, and I'm going to raise a small army, and I'm going to make your life difficult, and you're going to pay me money to stop this." And they did. And sometimes they took a stand. And one story that is really told in Louis' history is that one day, Anne and Mazarin managed to make Louis, to get him to escape the Paris. And so he runs away with his younger brother. They get caught, they get brought back in. 2 years later, there's this rumor that goes around in Paris in the middle of the night that the king has fled again. People of Paris freak out, and they say, "We demand to see the king." And so the rebels, who at the time were holding the castle, allow the people of Paris to just walk through Louis' bedroom all throughout the night to make sure that he was actually sleeping in his bed. Louis is humiliated in general by this event and scarred for life. And he swears that the nobles will never do that to him again. So what does he do? He becomes king. And one of the first things that he does is that he moves his court from the Louvre, which is a beautiful castle, but it's in the middle of Paris, which means that they are surrounded by Parisian people, very fickle, very inclined to rebellion and to complaining French people. And they move it to Versailles, which is about 30 to 40 minutes outside of Paris. And what he does there is that he really creates a court that he is at the heart of. He slowly strips away the power of his nobles. He makes them grovel for any of the privileges that he's now the sole provider of. He also keeps them dazzled with fantastic parties. And he makes sure that if they need anything from him, they have to ask him. So that means they have to be under his roof. They have to be in Versailles, and he can keep an eye on them at all time. They do not have the leisure anyway to walk away. There's etiquette that tells them every minute of the day what they're supposed to be doing and what their king is doing. So any absence is noted. He makes them grovel. He makes them stay. He makes them heel. He makes his court very centric. Next woman, the sexy mistress. Françoise d'Athénaïs de la Rochechouart de Mormart, Marquise de Montespan. That is a mouthful even for a French person, so we're just going to refer to her as Montespan moving forward. She is wild. She is the royal mistress from 67 to 80. And by that, we mean she's official, like her title is official mistress. Louis' mother has died now, and while mommy was here, we weren't gonna get really messy. We're gonna kind of keep the mistresses on the side. No, mommy's dead. We're bringing out the mistress to play. And she gets introduced to everyone that comes around. She is the most powerful woman at Versailles by a mile. They have 7 kids together, 6 of whom were legitimized. It's the most problematic of all of his affairs, weirdly, because she is also married, so it's a double adultery. I know, that is the threshold, apparently. I don't know. She was eventually disgraced over accusations of poisoning, which is a whole other story in and of itself. But what she is she is everything that that Louis wants his court to be, and everything that his queen is not. She is bold, she's out there, she's extrovert as all heck. She can hold a court, she is dazzling. The queen is this timid, shy, very introverted, brought up in very strict Catholic Spain, so she is boring. Montespan is witty. She knows French language. She can use it to tear you down to pieces, which if you've ever met a French person is like what we live to do. She knows how to talk to people. She also knows how to make them go away. The queen, after decades of living in France, still can barely speak any French. Montespan is cultured. She loves discovering new artists. She loves knowing what's in. She loves driving what's in. She wants to be that it girl. And she really influences Louis on this, to become an artist himself and a patron of the arts. He was already a renowned dancer. That's actually him over there. I know, and the costumes are hot, guys. And by dancer, it's not just like, oh, I have a little cameo in the ballet, we're cool. Like actually having parts, very athletic, very difficult parts. And same thing with a musician. He was an accomplished musician. And eventually what he does is that he surrounds himself with modern artists and frequently holds plays, operas, and parties at Versailles, again to keep his nobles dazzled and entertained. And he really was able to find and and kind of allowed to thrive. Many artists that are very well known in France, so for instance, Molière, who I had no idea if anyone has ever heard of, is effectively our Shakespeare, so like a hugely influential artist. Okay, third lady, the pious mistress, Françoise d'Aubigné, Marquise de Maintenon. Royal mistress from the mid-80s to 1715. She herself had a very interesting life before she even met Louis. She was born in the French Caribbean and then moved to France, which at the time, no one that was born in the French Caribbean ever made it to France, let alone to court. She was married to a burlesque poet, many, many, many years her elder. And she met the king when she became the governess to his and his previous mistress's children in 1969. And this was actually a big deal because when Louis first met Maintenon, he was really touched by how warm she was to his kids and how motherly she was when their own mother wanted nothing to do with them, as it was the trend at the time. Sorry, it's true. So Louis's wife, the queen, dies in 1683, and then some things start to change. So while it was normal for Louis to spend time with his mistresses, now he's spending an inordinate amount of time with her. He's taking meetings in her apartments. She is brought in to meet foreign dignitaries. He's openly asking her for her opinion. And then you have things like this is her, like one of her official portraits. If you see this, my friends, is ermine. What is ermine? It is a specific type of fur that is only used on the robes of royalty. So could it be that the royal mistress is actually a royal wife? A lot of historians agree that they married in secret and that she held roughly, in his life, all the privileges of a queen without having the title of it. So she was able to highly influence him. They were married for a long time, like a solid 20 years. She actually outlived him. She was older than him, but she actually outlived him as well. So they were both got to live a lot of time together. And what she was warm, devout, and no drama. Warm, we've already talked about, especially with his kids. Devout, she was very Catholic, and very, despite how she met the king, she was had calmed down in her old age, and she was no drama. The previous mistress was high maintenance on the best of her days, and she was, in comparison, no drama, and Louis really liked that. But what did it do? One of the big influential things that happened was an end of religious freedom. So if we go back to 1598, which is about 70 years prior, the Edict of Nantes gave religious freedom to Protestants in France, ending years of a terrible civil war. This was established by Louis's grandfather, Henry IV. Louis went ahead and revoked that edict in 1685 to very mixed results. Clearly, Protestants were pissed, both them and their allies across Europe. The Catholic Church actually was not particularly, was very mild in their response and their approval of it. The only people who really liked this were the French people, like the peasants, the people who were living in the country, because to them, Catholicism was the only religion in France. Louis, as the king, should be its representative and its warrior and the person who defended the Catholic faith. And that's what he was doing by doing that. This was long attributed to be under Maintenon's influence, as was a general, overall calmer and more austere climate at court. So pretty much anyone who had been around in the previous decade under the previous mistress was like, party! And now it was not party! It was a lot more boring, and some of them actually just disliked Maintenon just for that sole purpose of man, I was promised a rager, and this is not it. We're at the end, guys, I promise. So again, our Sun King is centric, radiant, and divine. Centric, he's able to keep his court, his very messy, unruly court, under his thumb. And he does it so that he can control everything of it. That is very much the influence of Anne and his childhood, and the fact that she wasn't always there to support him when he was younger. Radiant, the culture, everything that is French, that is cool, was exported. Everything was bright and sunny. That is absolutely Montespan. And then the divine aspect, the defender of the faith, the person who was there to uphold that, very much has the influence of Maintenon. So even this guy, as egocentric as he was, as I am the king, one-man show, could absolutely be influenced by his stars. Thank you so much for listening. Did I do it? Is there no time for Q&A?
There's time for questions.
Please, if no one has questions, we can all go home, guys. I did it. There's no questions. Ah, okay. Yes, ma'am.
I'll throw you a softball. So why of all the different points in history for France, why was this one your favorite?
Oh, she very kindly asked why this one was my favorite of all the kings and points of history in France. Just because he was so influential. He really shaped the way France is today. Just like if you even looked at our current administration, how centralized everything is in Paris and all that, his influence can be felt for centuries after that. And you gotta respect someone who took some unrowdy children and kind of, said no, bad children, and then stopped them from rebelling. I admire that, so yeah. Yes.
You know why I chose the sun as the symbol?
Yeah, there's more to it. He really saw himself as it's both the sun and the god Apollo. So both everything sets and rises with him. His schedule was very tight, like the sun, you could time it. Apollo is one of the warrior kings, so he's a defender. Apollo is also a patron of art, artists, etc. There's just a lot of these things that happen, and they're everywhere in his reign. Yes. Someone asked what he died of, and and I'm not there. Anyhow, what did he die of? I don't know. But at 77 at that time, we can just chalk it up to old age. But yeah. All right, thank you so much, guys.
Alrighty, y'all. Thank you so much for coming out tonight to Nerd Nite. Before you leave, our next Nerd Nite will be right here. That would be February the 13th. Doors open at 6:30. We'll get started at 7, just like today. February 13th, the day before Valentine's Day. Can you believe it? I can't either. We are always looking for folks who are interested in giving a Nerd Nite talk. So if you happen to be one of those people, you just bark up our tree and shoot us an email. Which leads me to my next point. On your way out, you'll see an email list. If you want to hear more about our monthly Nerd Nights, etc., join our email list. Just give us your address and we'll send you stuff. So let's give a round of applause for our 3 presenters tonight. They were so wonderful. And thank you guys so much for coming out. We'll see you February 13th.